When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed those who were ill. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. That's like magic. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," Jesus said. And he told the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. Altogether, they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men. The good news of Christ is to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So I mixed Matt up because I said there was 5,000 women besides men and children, but yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so speaking of being authentic, I find myself wondering whether I really need to do any more sermons. When I'm prepping sermons, I generally am always trying to prep the last sermon that you'll need to hear ever, because I guess I'm not a big believer in the monologue anymore. I know what I think, and I mean, it might be interesting to you, but really, who cares ultimately? Like, do you need to hear it? You could come up with your own. I mean, you guys can tell me what this passage means, right? Everyone, moral of the story. Jesus, disciples in usual form, and lots of people. I don't know why we keep writing it as 5,000. Let's say it's probably about 15,000. Let's just say those women count as full people. And probably where there's women, there's kids. So let's say Jesus is feeding 15,000 or so. And what everyday discipleship? And I know when I walk down the street, I regularly multiply everything I have and give away hundreds and hundreds of dollars and loads of food to everybody. I was kind of leaning away. Actually, I wrote a totally different sermon on Friday, and then I thought, oh, I can't say that, so I rewrote another one yesterday. But I don't really love the miracles, I have to say. I prefer Jesus didn't do any of them. It's a tiny bit annoying to me, but I feel like it's his humanness that does, even though it seems very divine to do miracles. I feel like it's his humanness. I feel like, it's sort of like, I kind of envision the law. We know the law doesn't make righteous. We know the law doesn't change hearts or transform. So what's the point of it? And I feel like it's a bit of a capitulation in a sense to our human nature, that we have a thirst for blood, and because I know I do. So if I do, and I seem so nice, don't I? Then surely some of you do, and we all do, right? There's sort of violence in us, right? We have a desire and we have a need for forgiveness and to kind of do things symbolically to help us bring the invisible visible, right? And so I feel like, because a couple chapters before this, there's a few chapters before this, Jesus says, people don't live on bread alone. They live by the words of God. And he's been talking to them for a while. So if his words are enough, why does he feed them? And a couple chapters before this, he says it's an evil and idolatrous generation that seeks signs and wonders and miracles. And because miracles are, they're distracting, right? They're a really big physical sign, and they attract a lot of people, but they too don't really transform hearts and change things, right? They're like, it's like a magic show, kind of, in a sense. It's like it's entertaining in the moment, but it doesn't necessarily like help us, you know, build a life of faith. And that's why I love like him saying that Jonah is the only sign he's going to give, right? Not just for the 3 days and 3 nights, but the other, we always focus on that part, but the part that really means something to me about Jonah now is the Ninevites. That who you want to exclude, who I want to exclude. Someone I know recently became a Christian like about a year ago, and I'm like super annoyed with this person because I'm like, ugh, now we're like getting lumped together, and this guy is like kind of, I mean, it's going to sound super judgy, but I'm just going to do it. Here it is. He's kind of egotistical. He's full of himself. He wants the signs and the wonders. He wants to like fight with me about every doctrinal point. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to, right? And he changes religions frequently. So I'm also like, you know, like at Christmas, he was a Hindu and he's been a Buddhist, and he cycles through. And I think, God, really? Like, so there's people I would totally exclude, but like, well, and probably half the time I'd exclude myself, actually. Like, let's be totally frank, I would probably exclude myself half the time. But Jesus is like indiscriminately loving, like annoyingly so, right? Like, he's like, oh, everyone hates you? I'd love to go to your house for supper. Sweet, here I am, you know? You're kind of a jackass? You're my kind of guy. Come, why don't you step right up? You can be one of my disciples. I'm gonna keep you close, right? And that's what kind of happens here. I think about like this, there's something significant about this story because it's the only story besides the Transfiguration that's in all 4 Gospels, which is sort of interesting. And they have slightly different details, but there's a lot of overlap. Generally, the 5 loaves, 2 fishes, and that they're in a remote place. There's kind of a reference to the Israelites in, you know, with Moses, and of course the disciples are always trying to prove that Jesus is better than Moses, right? We didn't just get, Moses fed the people by asking God, but this is the bread of life himself, right? So yeah, he sees, in all of them, what's clear, it says that he has compassion. Or in Luke, it says that he sees the crowd. They've been with him for 1 or 3 days, depending on which gospel you're looking at. And he has compassion. It's late, there's kids. They might, in one of them, it says he's worried they might fall down on the way home, right? Because he's been preaching at them all day long. Where's your stamina, people? And they're all these people are there. And who are these people? Well, I know exactly who these people are. Because for the most part, most people in that day and age would have had to been working to provide themselves with food. So they're slackers, they're people without jobs. They're homeless people. They're people not in the synagogues listening to the leaders and traditional religion. They're people wandering around in remote places. In John, it says there are people looking for signs and wonders. They want to see the show. They want to see someone get healed. They want to see some action. They want some proof that God's around, you know, some physical, tangible proof. And they're prostitutes and they're sinners and they're just generally people like you and me, just regular old outcasts looking for something, right? Looking for something. Like, we're just so hungry, right? And hungry is like, not just physical hunger. Hungry is like achy and tired and longing that just breaks you, right? It's exhausted from having to wait and wait and wait. And Jesus has compassion on them. And I think it's his humanness that is like, he's given them the spiritual stuff. He's given them the invisible, the words that are meant to kind of go down and feed them and satisfy them. But I think his humanness is just like, he knows what it's like to be hungry and tired and hot at the end of the day. And he has compassion. And he doesn't care what their motives are. He just doesn't care. He just feeds everybody. Doesn't matter if you're here for a sideshow, doesn't matter if you're here because you want something from him, doesn't matter if you're here just to get healed and dash away and do your same old life ever again. Like, Jesus just totally indiscriminate. I really love that, just totally indiscriminate. I have like a really long list of reasons why Jesus shouldn't love me. Like, it's exceedingly long. All those things are just like nothing. They're like ghosts, right? They're not even like, they're like phantoms. They're not even a real substance. Interestingly, he makes it, all the ones, they all say that he ordered them to sit down. Sit down. I'm not going to feed you if you're standing. I don't know if it's just like practicalities but I kind of like that you get the picture actually that, and in one of them in John, it says it's a very grassy place. Really? Why? Who cares if there's grass there? But why, right? There's a very grassy place. It's kind of like Psalm 23, right? He leads me, he makes me lie down. I love that they have to sit. They don't come up like buffet style, like we do communion, right? And they don't come serve themselves. He sends the disciples out and serves them. And they're all totally satisfied. They're satiated, right? That hunger is done. And they'll be hungry tomorrow morning, right? Like, it doesn't go away. They'll be hungry tomorrow morning. And probably with 15,000 people, some of them probably don't realize it's a miracle. Like, imagine you're the 15,000th and that's pretty far. You don't know really what's going on. And Jesus doesn't even make it super clear. He's not that showy about it. He's like, hey, I'm doing a miracle, sit on down here. Yeah, okay. Can you do this? Everyday discipleship, here it is. But before he does it, and I like to think that he could have just made bread out of rocks, right? The devil says to him, if you're Son of God, you can do anything, right? You can manipulate matter. But he doesn't. He does something that he does to us, which is like, hey, so what do you think? What do you want? And the disciples, like us, are like, I want to not deal with this giant pain in the ass. I want to be done for today and go sit somewhere with you, and we eat these 5 loaves and 2 fishes, which are already not quite enough for 13 dudes, and who've been walking all day, and despite, and let's just not deal with these people, right? And why does he ask them just to like I ask my kids, why would Jesus say, you feed them, just like super casual. So, and he knows how much they've got. Why would he do that? And Evangeline, what'd she say? Like, just to like test them, like to see them squirm. He might have had a little loving of some squirm factor. I suppose you gotta get your kicks some way sometimes when you're the man of sorrows. So I think he invites them because he's teaching them what, that we think of God as all-powerful, right? Like that's kind of one of our little things we're not going to quite give up. Except that God totally doesn't act that way with us. God completely limits their power to our size, right? Jesus shrinks from, creator, the word spoken at creation, to man says, and kind of takes what we've got. It's sort of like Moses with, what do you have in your hand? You got a stick. Sweet, let's work with that cool stick, right? And I was thinking about like how it's just so little. It's so little. It's just so inadequate to feed 15,000 people. And I'm like, that's exactly how I feel most of the time. I'm like, and these days, everyone's listening. You can see on Pinterest or Brene Brown, all these people are saying, tell yourself, I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. I call bullshit. I don't really believe it. We're not enough. Like, what are you actually enough for? Like, I'm just gonna think. I am not enough in my marriage. Totally, I like flop in that area regularly. I'm totally not enough for my kids. They need way more than me. I'm not enough to like end the war in Ukraine. I'm not enough to bring, peace to the Middle East. I'm not enough to even deal with anything on Hastings. I'm not enough to even like be friendly to all of my neighbors that live on the same street as me. Like, I just can't cope with that many people. And I think that littleness, you can tell yourself, I am enough, I am enough. You can look in the mirror, I'm enough, and people love you, but I don't know that's really gonna sink in. And I don't think it should sink in. Why are we trying to be enough? Why bother? Why bother trying to be enough? Jesus didn't go, oh, I'm enough. I'm just gonna feed you out of my enoughness. No, Jesus said, I can't do anything alone. I can't do anything alone. He feeds those people out of the overflow of his oneness with the Creator, his oneness with creation. It's the overflow of that oneness that can transform matter. That's actually true. I know you think I'm talking metaphorically, but it isn't. It is actually true. All the mystics say we are one with God. God is not a separate thing from us. That little picture in the little tracts, those devil books that have the little two cliffs, and you're on one and God's over here, and oh my God, and thank God the cross fell down. That's not true. And you can walk across that little bridge. That's not true. Those are like heresy. Like, we are actually one with the Father, with the Creator, with creation, with each other. And it's that oneness that transforms. Believing that, knowing that, trusting that will actually rewire your brain. The world you're living in is the one you see. That's actually true. That's science. That's how our brains work. How we trust, how we see is what you're living in. And so we're living with a little. We're just living with a little. But it doesn't matter, because we don't have to be enough. What we are enough for, crazy enough. I'm not enough to stop the war in Ukraine. I am enough for God to have a relationship with. Like, this little bitty speck of dust in the universe is actually more than enough for God to be like, you and me, let's do it forever. I'm here with you. Like, that is crazy. Like, you can't actually fix or solve or do anything, or we can stand with each other in suffering. I can't take your suffering away. I can't fix anything for you. You can't fix anything for anybody else. Your little is too little. But I'm enough for God to be with all the time. Like, God finds enough space here. Well, I can't wrap my head around it, but it's true. Somehow it's true, right? Enough for you, enough for you. You're enough. You're enough for like the creator of the universe to be in. And so what he does, Jesus gives thanks for that little. And I think there's something really there, right? Gratitude is actually the fastest way to rewire your prefrontal cortex. We hate our littleness. We kind of feel disillusioned by it. We feel mad at it. And so we live beyond our limit, right? We spend too much. We do too much. We make endless lists of things to do that will never get done. You'll die with that list, we spread ourselves too thin. We put our heart too thin. We give to too many people. We try to live past our limit. We sleep too little. This whole culture is past its limit, right? Like Canadians are massively in debt because we're all past our limit, because we don't want to feel that littleness and we don't want to feel the hunger. It's achy and it sucks, right? But Jesus brings them together. And he gives thanks, and not like the dumb Pollyanna thanks, like thanks that you love me no matter what. Not that thanks, and not, it's the thanks for what is. Christians love to change things and control things. I know, because I'm one of them. We like to believe that what is just isn't quite what should be, right? We're always kind of holding up in a Christian ideal that we should be, and I should be a better Christian, or have more faith, or more this or more that, because I'm too little with this and too little with that. And I really believe that ideal Christian that we hold up is actually an idol. I think it's a massive distraction from who you are, because God doesn't live in that ideal Christian, because it's not real. God lives in you. I am the house of the Spirit right here. Me as I am. It's indiscriminate love. It's satiating you even with your mixed motives and divided hearts. And so I think, can we just give thanks for what we are? And that maybe what you are is what needs to be. Maybe what you are is your cross and your way to walk, and is your gift and is your blessing, the way you are, with too little. Because the upside of too little is you can't do it by yourself. You're forced to brush against the other porcupines, right? We're forced to come to each other and be like, I'm needy and pathetic, please love me, right? And it's a good thing. Because if we didn't have that sometimes, what we would do is just doom scroll to the end of time, or entertain ourselves to death, or, stare at the ceiling and never get out of bed. You know what I mean? It's good that you've got too little. It forces us to come to each other and to see God in each other, and forces us to come and to Jesus and be like, I've just got a little. Jesus is like, no problem. I've got faith with your little. Jesus has faith. Jesus had faith. That's how he lived. He lived by faith. We don't actually even have to have all the faith that feels like we need to have. I feel like we can actually just lean on his faith. I'm pretty sure Paul says that. Right? Don't worry about your little faith. You got somebody living in you who's got all the faith. And so maybe, I spend a lot of energy trying to be enough, a ton. And I spend a lot of energy trying to be something I'm not. I sometimes wonder, what could I do if I didn't spend my energy doing those things? I would have so much more energy. I could paint 1,000 paintings, if I didn't spend my energy doing that. Or trying to convince other people that they're enough, I don't really feel like convincing other people that they're enough either. You're like, no, you're not enough. You need to come and hang out. You need to come be together. Let's love each other. Let's hug each other. Let's remember we're alive, and little bits are like more than enough. Yeah. Sorry, my notes are a little bit multi-directional. I think I'll close with this, well, researching. Let me get my old lady glasses on. In doing this, I came across Ezekiel 34. And in it, it's a little scathing at the start, as prophets tend to be. But maybe something in here will speak to you, because it kind of spoke to me. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to those shepherds, this is what the Lord God says. Woe, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding themselves. Should the shepherds not feed the flock? So a little while later, Jesus says to them, like when they again are in a boat later talking about bread and if they got enough to eat, like this is like a couple chapters later, they still didn't get quite the message. And he says, beware the yeast of the Sadducees and Pharisees. So the Sadducees and Pharisees were running the temple and the synagogues, and yet they weren't feeding their flocks. They were feeding themselves, getting fat and clothing themselves, and without feeding the flock. Those who are sickly are not you have not strengthened. The disease you have not healed. The broken you have not bound up. The scattered you have not brought back, nor have you searched for the lost. But with force and violence you have dominated them. I think the other thing Jesus is trying to teach his disciples all the time is responsiveness, right? Like, I think that's really the essence. What is God wanting from us? It's actually just responsiveness. It says the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth, searching for hearts that are just responsive to our own pain and hurt and hunger, so that we cry out and reach out, but to others too. Like, the worst is when you feel hurt and no one's seeing it, and or they're walking past you and seeing it, not caring, keeping up with their chit chatter. So there's a little more about the shepherds. And then God says, behold, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd cares for his flock on a day when he is among his scattered, so I will care for my sheep and will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a cloudy and gloomy day. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and bring them to their own land, and I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the streams, and in all the inhabited places of the land. I will feed them in a good pasture, and their grazing place will be on the mountain heights of Israel. There they will lie down in good grazing place and feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will feed my flock, and I myself will lead them to rest. I will seek the lost, bring back the scattered, bind up the broken, strengthen the sick, but the fat and the strong I will eliminate. So Jesus is totally seeking his flock here. I recently went off leadership, and I feel like when I'm on leadership, I get a little fat with the warm glowiness of being a leader. I've never in all my life been the leader. I've always been the outsider and the fringe person on the edge. And since stepping off, I feel like a little more like myself again. I feel like, right, I think on the edge is not a bad place to be, because there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people there. And you know what? I can totally give thanks on the edge, because it's super easy on the edge, to see the beauty in people, like to see rawness and vulnerability and be so drawn to the beauty of that, knowing that this is exactly who Jesus is seeking. Like Mark shared a song on the talent show last Saturday, and I was just like weeping through that. And he didn't give any preface except for that he was a little bit self-conscious and it kind of played the guitar and sang at the same time. But I was just like weeping at the beauty of how imperfect it was, and that it was about a loss that was really grievous to him. And then he just shared, it wasn't spiritual, but it was just him. That felt like the most spiritual thing. I felt like I saw the face of God in that, you know? And yeah, we run from our littleness and our vulnerability, and we want to hide it and we cover it, but actually we're totally drawn to it in each other. It's what draws us to each other when someone's vulnerable, right? So we shouldn't actually fear our vulnerability. We should, like Paul, be like, woo, I am so weak. I am so fragile. I am so vulnerable. I am not enough for everything that's in my life. But hey, God loves that place. He comes rushing in, right? Like, think of at the beach when there's all the rocks and all the little crevices and that wave comes in, it fills every space. Like it just instantly fills every space, right? Indiscriminate love, indiscriminate love, indiscriminate love. That's the love of God. That's ours. That's ours to trust. And trust God's enoughness. And you can just be yourness, me-ness, and that's enough. That is enough. So, yeah, communion feels like the perfect thing to take today, right? Be fed by Jesus shrinking down to our size. And I love that Jesus kind of goes through time. You know, the Catholics, my mother was Catholic, so Catholics always have Jesus on that cross between the cursor and the prayer, right? And we're kind of like that, we float between, and yet Jesus stretches his arms out to both. I love that that's sort of the picture we have. So, Jesus, thank you for our littleness. Some of the lovers of you have actually found like real peace and joy in just being their little selves. And because we live, yes, in this world that fills us with hunger, but we also live one foot in an invisible world, the unseen. Would you please soften our hearts, tenderize our hearts, make them so sensitive that every like sway of the Spirit, every just gentle breeze of the Spirit is heard by our hearts, and make us responsive to you, to each other, and to seeing you everywhere, because you're everywhere. You're in every remote place. If I go up to the highest heavens, I go down to hell, you're there. You're there. And you descend, and you're always descending to our darkest, hardest, shamest places. Without irritation, without annoyance, but with indiscriminate love, just so, you're so grateful for us because we can be the receiver of your love. We are your bride, and we're here to respond to your every touch. Thank you for our children, and thank you for communion. Amen.